Last summer, my mom, dad, and I decided to go to our dacha in Zaslav. I was 16 at the time. I took my favorite dog Terry, German Shepherd, with me. Anyway, at about 15:20 we finally arrived and entered the house. Everything was fine. Mom went to cook all sorts of goodies, and Dad climbed into the attic. He was looking for spare parts for the motorcycle. Everything was fine. I was running around the garden with Terry and doing nonsense. It was already approaching evening. It was about 1800 hours. We sat down at the table in the kitchen, started eating and discussing family matters. But suddenly my dad got a call. He picked up the phone. His face took on a worried look. When he finished the conversation, we asked what was going on. He said that our neighbor, Aunt Lena, had died. We lived next door, communicated well. She often treated me and my dog. We had a good relationship, but then this happened. 45 years and she was gone. I was upset and went into another room. Suddenly my parents came in and said that they had to go to the city and find out what had happened. However, I had to stay. I was terribly scared, but fortunately my faithful friend was with me. Around 7 o'clock, Mom and Dad left the house and told me to keep an eye on everything until they arrived. They promised to be back by 5 in the morning. And Mom also added that if something happened, call. This gave me strength. And as soon as they left, I walked Terry, and then, when we arrived, I locked all the doors and windows too. It was already dark. To make it less scary, I turned on the lights in the whole house, took 2 powerful flashlights and turned on the TV. My friend and I sat down on the sofa and started watching TV. Time passed quickly. Terry was already falling asleep on my lap, but suddenly, I heard something fall in the next room. Out of fear, I turned up the volume on the TV. It was about 11 o'clock. I took my phone, just in case, and when I turned it on, I noticed that the network was unavailable, although a couple of hours ago everything worked. Okay, I attached special significance to this and continued watching TV. Suddenly, bam, the electricity went out in the whole house. I was scared, but not confused, took a few candles. I prepared them in advance, because I knew that something bad could happen, and lit them. They gave off a dim light, but this did not bother me. I took the flashlight in my left hand and hugged the dog. We lay like this for about 20 minutes. I was already thinking about how to fall asleep, but then the most terrible moment of the whole story happened. I heard someone walking in the attic. I immediately wanted to jump up and grab the axe that was standing by the stove, just in case. But as soon as I was about to get up, I saw a white silhouette outside the window, walking quite quickly. My dog somehow became wary and sat down next to me, as if he had sensed someone and was ready to pounce on him. But I held him, because I was afraid to make noise. I was lying there, listening, and suddenly I heard someone knocking on the door. But not like a human, but very slowly, with an interval of 4 seconds. At first I thought that my parents had come, but why knock? They definitely have keys, and they wouldn't knock like this creature. I was terribly scared. I wanted to cover myself with a blanket and hide from all this. But I couldn't. I was afraid to move, and suddenly the knocking stopped. I thought, that's it, I'm over it. But the thought of where this creature could go scared me a lot. The thought that tormented me most was that it would break the window and come inside. But none of that happened. I was sitting there, it seemed like it had already passed. I took the flashlight, turned it on, and almost died of fear. That same white silhouette flashed right in front of me and ran into the hallway at high speed. My dog immediately rushed after it. I was so worried about it that I jumped down, took the axe and ran into the room after it. It seemed that everything was fine, no one was there. Terry also calmed down, sat down next to me. But suddenly I saw that same silhouette in the window. It was slowly moving away from the house, as if it did not want to leave it. And at that moment the light turned on. I lost that silhouette from my field of vision. It seemed that it became less scary, but suddenly I heard someone's voice. And I remembered that I was watching TV, and now, when the light turned on, it started working again. Terry and I went into that room and continued watching TV. There were no thoughts about sleep. And so it was until about 4 in the morning. Then someone quickly passed by the window. I again thought it was that creature, but no, it was my father. I went to open the door, and yes, it was him. He came in, took off his hat, walked into the room. I glanced at him. He looked like he was on the verge of death. I immediately asked what happened there and where my mother was. He said that Aunt Lena died, her heart gave out, or something like that. But before she died, she managed to write, "Come to my grave in 40 days, otherwise." She couldn't write anymore. I felt very sorry for Aunt Lena. In the end, my dad said that we had to go to the city. I got dressed, took Terry and we went. When I got home, my mother was upset, and so was I. But then I remembered what happened to me at night, and I decided to tell them. After listening to me, my mother said that, most likely, Aunt Lena did not want to leave me. Aunt Lena was buried 2 days later. And then I remembered what my dad had told me. Before she died, Aunt Lena wrote, "Come to my grave in 40 days, otherwise." 40 days passed, and I decided to go to her grave. I went to our local cemetery, found her grave, sat down next to it and read over the tombstone, "Everything will be fine. Just forget me." I didn't know what these words meant, and I decided to go home. I didn't want to tell anyone about it. That same day, when I went to bed, I remembered these words, but I fell asleep right away. I dreamed of Aunt Lena. She had long hair, although she had always had short hair. But then I heard her say, "Forgive me." After which she turned around and left. But then I woke up, because of Terry. He joyfully pounced on me and started licking my face. After that, Aunt Lena never appeared in my dreams again. You'll probably think I'm a psycho and paranoid, but trust me, I wouldn't want anything I've written below to be true. I was sitting at home alone, sipping beer and watching another TV series. It was already about 3 in the morning, and I was inexorably falling asleep. I turned off the computer, but as soon as my head hit the pillow, the beer wanted to come out, and I was forced to get up. In the toilet, out of habit, I didn't turn on the light, and that's when it all started. I suddenly remembered all my childhood fears and horror films that I've watched throughout my life. The sticky fear enveloped me more and more, and now I was afraid to leave the toilet. But I still overcame myself and calmly walked to bed. The next morning, remembering this incident, I just laughed and immediately forgot about it. But the lower the sun sank, the more the tension grew. For some reason, I really didn't want to be alone at home. I even called a few people, offering to have a drink together, but everyone was busy. What happened next that evening changed my life forever. It was already getting dark. I was sitting at the computer as usual. And then suddenly I heard a noise from another room. I turned down the volume and heard it again. I thought it was the neighbors, but decided to check anyway. Walking down the hallway to the room it was coming from, I heard it again, and that's when I got really scared. It was the sound my parrot made when he started hitting his beak on the mirror. The cage was flimsy, so it rattled loudly. Everything would have been fine, but my parrot died a couple of years ago. Overcoming my fear, I opened the door, but naturally there was nothing inside. An hour and a half passed, and 1.5 liters of beer passed through me, and the fear gradually faded away. Remembering that I had vodka in the fridge, I decided to let's go for it, although I never drank vodka alone. Entering the kitchen, I again did not turn on the light, and as soon as I opened the fridge, I felt a heavy gaze on me. In a second, fear turned into panic, but I was afraid to move. The light from the fridge was the only thing that protected me at that moment. Whatever was standing behind me and looking at me began to approach. And I stood there, staring at a piece of sausage, and prayed for a miracle. And it happened. The fridge beeped unpleasantly, reminding me that it should not be left open for more than 30 seconds, and the gaze disappeared. Grabbing the vodka, I flew into the room like a bullet, turned on the light, started the music and sat there until the morning without closing my eyes. After that, I was afraid to stay home alone for a week. I either invited friends over or stayed with them myself. And when I was alone, I turned on the lights in the entire apartment and tried not to leave my room. I cooked the food during the day and carried it into the room so that I would have something to eat at night, because I couldn't sleep properly. I can also add that I started drinking a lot. In a drunken stupor, everything doesn't seem so scary. About a month later, everything somehow forgot itself, but I still turned on the lights everywhere. Sometimes I thought about all this and eventually came to the conclusion that I just had problems with my head, because I had never seen physical evidence of the existence of what scared me so much. This thought was like the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. I promised myself that if this happened again, would simply make an appointment with a psychiatrist and we would solve my problems together. But everything turned out to be much worse. Once, after drinking about 3 liters of beer, I fell asleep. Waking up in the night from a strong need to relieve myself, I got up and wandered to the toilet on autopilot. As soon as I opened the door to the toilet, I broke out in a sweat and got goosebumps. The light was on only in the toilet. Only in the toilet. Although I had turned on all the lights in the apartment myself. Once inside, I latched the door and huddled in the corner, praying that the light in the toilet would not go out. If it had gone out that day, I would have probably gone crazy. In the morning, I found myself crying near the toilet. My bones were aching, probably a good half of my nerve cells had died, but I didn't care. The main thing was that I was alive. The next week, I went on a binge so bad that I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy. But you can't drink forever, and I didn't have any money for booze. When I sobered up, I realized that everything had gotten even worse. Now I felt a gaze on me all the time, even during the day with the light on. I would like to finish my story here, but the most terrible thing is happening right now, while I am typing this text. The door to my room is equipped with a patterned, cloudy glass, through which only silhouettes are visible. For the last hour, I have noticed some movements behind the glass out of the corner of my eye. I tried not to look towards the door, but in the end I could not resist. Looking at the door, I was indescribably horrified. I saw him through the glass. I don't know what it is, but it is looking at me from behind the door, and I am scared as never before in my life. A few months ago, my parents moved to a small village, and I had to attend a new school. The house next door belonged to a crazy old woman. All day long, she sat alone on a bench in front of the house, muttering to herself. One day, as I was passing by, I noticed that she was stroking something lying on her lap. At first I thought it was a cat, but when I looked closer, I realized that there was nothing there. She was simply holding her hand above her lap, stroking the thin air. Perhaps she once had a cat or a dog, I thought, and it died, and in her distraught mind she thinks it is still there. I felt sorry for the old woman, and with a sigh, I continued on my way. Then one night, when I was fast asleep in my bed, something strange happened. I woke up and felt that there was something hairy lying next to me. I got scared and jumped out of bed. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. It flew across the floor and out the door. I was shocked, but when I calmed down, I realized that it was probably just a stray cat or dog that had wandered into the house. That's when I happened to look out of my bedroom and saw the crazy old woman next door. She was standing on the sidewalk, under a street lamp. Her long gray hair was blowing freely in the wind. Her eyes were wide open and she was looking straight at me. I was so scared that I jumped back from the window. Then the woman turned and went into the house. It took me a long time to calm down, but eventually I went back to bed. As I was falling asleep, I remembered something that seemed strange to me. When I saw the shadow of a stray cat or dog running out of my room, it didn't seem to run, it seemed to roll across the floor toward the door. The next morning, when I woke up, I got dressed and went downstairs to have breakfast. That morning, on my way to school, I passed the old woman's house again. As usual, she was sitting on a bench, muttering to herself and stroking something invisible in her lap. As I passed by, I distinctly heard her ask, "Why did you run away from me last night? Look how you scared that boy." I felt a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it made me shudder. It was all I could do not to start running. At school, I decided to ask my friends about the old woman. No one really knew anything except that she had been released from a mental hospital about 10 years ago. They said that she had mental problems, and that was why everyone stayed away from her. After her release, all she did was sit on the bench outside her house all day. A few days later, my father started talking to an old man who had lived in the village all his life. When my father asked him about the old woman, he told a very scary story. He said that the old woman had spent more than 30 years of her life in a mental hospital. In her youth, she had been married, and she and her husband lived together in the same house. According to him, she had suspected her husband of cheating on her for years, but he always denied it. And then, one night, she caught him with another woman. She hacked him to death with an axe and chopped off his head. When the police arrived, she was sitting on a bench in front of her house with a crazy grin on her face. Her husband's severed head lay on her lap. And she was saying something to him, gently stroking it. When my parents told me they were going to New York for the weekend to celebrate their wedding anniversary, I wasn't too worried. I was 17 years old, and I considered myself old enough to spend a few days alone. Our house was in a small town in Vermont, surrounded by dense woods. There were almost no neighbors, the nearest house was a mile away. Silence and solitude have always been pleasant to me, until now. On Friday night, after my parents left, I decided to relax. I ordered pizza, turned on Netflix, and settled into a cozy spot on the couch. Everything was going as usual until it started to get dark. I heard a strange sound, something like a light tapping on the glass. At first I thought it was just a tree branch. But then I remembered that there were shutters on the first floor windows. It was definitely not possible for someone or something to touch the glass from the outside. Deciding that it was just my imagination, I continued watching the series. But soon the sound came again. This time it was louder, like someone tapping their fingers. I got up to check and went to the living room window. There was nothing outside, just the blackness of the forest and maybe a faint glimmer of something in the distance. I pulled the curtains and went back to the couch, trying to convince myself that everything was okay. An hour passed and I was starting to forget about the incident, when I suddenly heard footsteps on the back porch. The footsteps were slow and careful. They sounded like someone was deliberately trying not to attract attention. I grabbed a kitchen knife and headed for the back door. The porch light was on, but there was no one there. Just a slight movement in the bushes at the edge of the forest. It could have been a deer or another animal. I tried to calm myself down, but my heart was still pounding. Later, around midnight, things got even worse. I closed all the doors and windows on the first floor and went up to my room. As I lay in bed, I heard a strange sound, as if someone was whispering right behind the door. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words, but the whisper was quiet and incoherent. Gathering my courage, I opened the door. There was no one in the hallway. However, the light in the bathroom was flickering, as if the bulb was trying to burn out. But that was strange. I clearly remembered turning off all the lights on the second floor. I closed the door again and sat on the bed, trying to figure out what to do. Call the police? But what would I say? I heard a whisper behind the door. They would only laugh. As soon as I began to calm down, I noticed that the room had become cold. Very cold. I turned on the heater, but it did not help. And then I heard the whisper again, but this time it sounded right behind me. My heart pounded so hard that I seemed to have gone deaf. I turned around slowly and saw a dark silhouette in the corner of the room. The silhouette was tall and its face was in shadow, but I felt like it was looking right at me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body felt paralyzed. The silhouette took a step toward me, and at that moment the light in the room went out. When I woke up, it was already getting light outside. I was lying on the floor in the living room, and the door to the back porch was wide open. I had no idea how I got there. Everything looked like nothing had happened. Only the heater in my room was turned over, and there was a strange dark mark on the floor, like a handprint. I didn't tell my parents about it when they came home. They wouldn't have believed me anyway, and you know what? Sometimes when I go to bed, I can still hear that whisper.